No one says, feed your bees X amount, because they're all different. They're like kids, right? I could be looking at some of my kids and they're right next to each other and they're completely different. And I could be looking at two beehives right next to each other and two things are happening that are different. So the easiest way to remember about feeding is the bees, they will tell you. They'll tell you. I always tell people, feed them, feed them, feed them. Keep feed on your bees until you notice they're not touching it anymore. They will tell you we're getting natural nectar from nature, so we don't need the substitute anymore, and they won't touch it. As long as they are consuming it, they are telling you we need it. It is that simple. Okay? So if your bees are not progressing, it's due to a lack of feed, more than likely. And then at that point, you gotta feed them. When you make sucrose, it's 66% solids. And what I mean by that will be solid amount of sugar in that liquid. The reason that sugar water ferments is because it's below the fermentation line, which is 71%. Okay? And sugar water ferments very quick. And when sugar water ferments, the bees are not going to take it. So you could be thinking, they're not consuming my feed. They must be getting it, but they're not consuming it because they don't want it. That's different. That's a problem. So if you feed sugar water, it's very important to know you have a very small timeline for them to consume that. And I would highly recommend that you guys use Pro Health. Okay? Pro Health is going to slow down the fermentation process, and it's all natural with thymol and lemongrass and different things that the bees like. So it's an attractant. So when you put this into a sugar water mixture, it's going to smell good for them, and they consume that sugar water faster. Okay? At the same time, you won't waste money on the sugar that you just spent money on. Okay? So if you feed sugar water, make sure you're adding Pro Health. Now, some of you guys might feed Pro Sweet. Okay? Now, Pro Sweet is a syrup blend that we make at Mann Lake. And I'll go over the differences of syrup versus the sucrose, just so you guys have the information. This is 77% solid. And what that means is that this is never going to ferment. So it's shelf stable forever, and it'll never crystallize. Now it's thick, because it's thick like honey. And that's because due to the amount of sugars, because all three sugars are used when we make Pro Sweet. We use fructose, we use glucose, and we use sucrose. So Pro Sweet is a feed that actually hits all three of the sugar groups within the bee's diet, and it never ferments. Now, the very cool thing about Pro Sweet as well is if you're feeding sugar water, it's very thin. Okay? So when they consume that sugar water, some of that sugar water is going to be used to secrete wax, and some of it they're not going to use. So they're going to store it like they would nectar. Because there's a lot of water in that, over 30%, because remember, sugar water is only about 66%, so 33% is going to be water. The bees are going to exert energy dehydrating and fanning it. When they exert energy, they're going to burn carbs. When they burn carbs, what are they going to do? Consume more food. And it can get expensive. So the difference with syrup is because it's thick already like honey, it's cappable immediately. There is no dehydration for them to do. So when your bees consume ProSweet, whatever they don't use to draw wax, they can store, they can cap, essentially using less energy, less carbs, because they're getting more sugar per gallon than they are in any feed, so they're fuller. Bees forage and get pollen, but pollen out in the flowers or trees that they're consuming is not in its digestible state at that time. So bees go out, they come in, and we've all been keeping bees here, and we've definitely seen the pollen sacs coming in on bees, right? And then they're walking around. It's really amazing. And that's fresh pollen that they're literally bringing into that hive right there. That pollen is going to get broken up into pellets and stored in a cell. And through saliva and different processes that the nurse bees go through, they'll turn that pollen into what we call bee bread. At that time, bee bread is then digestible for the honeybee. This is Ultra Bee Dry, and this is a dry powder pollen substitute. This is a 10-pound bucket, and what you would do here is you would put this out about 50 feet, 100 feet away from your hive, and your bees are gonna go forage on it like they would on natural pollen, bring it back into the hive, and turn it into bee bread. So that's how dry pollen works. And dry pollen is a really good option in the Southeast, typically because of hive beetle. Beetles love protein. And in the Southeast, we've got a lot of them. We have other options, even with hive beetles. We have a pollen patty. When people talk about bee bread, a pollen patty essentially is a supplement for bee bread, okay? And this is, pollen patty is ready to eat in a digestible form that would be inserted right directly into the hives. These are a pound, and the bees are gonna chew through that wax paper. If we're gonna feed a pollen patty, and it's the summertime, and it's 4th of July, and I'm in one hive body, I'm gonna put that patty right up. Typically, you're gonna put it right over the brood nest, okay? And the bees are gonna consume that patty. And remember, that's ready to eat because it's digestible. And in that summer, those summer months where our queen is not getting protein and she's saying there's not enough food to feed babies, she's getting protein, keep laying babies. See how that works? So Ultra Bee is a fantastic product. Just a month ago, we just came out with Ultra Bee Plus. And this is really, we're very, very excited about this. And this was something I had the opportunity to work on with the team. This has natural pollen in it, 5%. And what we found was that even during a flow, if the pollen isn't better than the pollen that's in here, they may even choose this over something coming in because there's natural pollen in it. All of the pollen that we use is all domestic pollen from American beekeepers, and then we go bring it through an eradication process, make sure everything is clean. And then we started tinkering a little bit with the recipe and started putting in natural pollen. And the consumption rate looks to be almost a little more than half. So these bees are consuming the pollen patty with natural pollen faster than they're consuming a pollen patty without natural pollen. So it's a really cool thing. Now, regardless of whatever patty you decide to feed during the summer, if you do decide to feed a pollen patty and opt away from the dry option, it's important, because of hive beetle in the southeast, that we don't just put our patty on just like that. And we'll show you why. So our patty is a big rectangle. And the bees, they're gonna eat. They're gonna come around the patty and eat it from the outside in. That's a huge amount of surface area for beetles to lay. So what I do, because I do prefer patties, because it's a direct feed into that hive, is I will take this patty and rip it into 8 pieces. And now I have a 1-pound pollen patty in my hive over 8 pieces that look like this. And I'm gonna put one over here in the corner, and one over here, and one over here, and one over there, and one over there. And when I come back in a day, I'm gonna have bees around all of them. And guess what? No room for that hive beetle to lay. Okay. So just because we deal with hive beetle doesn't mean we can't feed a pollen patty.